This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.
Welcome to the Fatigue Fixer podcast. Ever wonder why it feels like the entire sisterhood is just so darn exhausted? We're diving deep into everything from those sneaky physical culprits, think iron levels playing hide and seek or a moody thyroid, to the mental weights of always being on and that sneaky urge to please everyone. And let's not forget society's oh-so-high bar that we're tirelessly trying to reach. I'm Dr. Sarah Vadeboncoeur, your guide on this energy-finding mission. As a naturopathic doctor with over a decade of experience, I've been piecing together the fatigue puzzle, asking why so many incredible women around me, including my patients, often feel like they're running on empty. So pull up a chair or perhaps pop in your headphones and head out for a walk. Together we'll uncover those hidden, surprising, and sometimes even downright unexpected reasons behind that lingering tiredness. Ready to recharge those batteries? All right, deep breath. Let's jump into today's insightful episode. Welcome back to the Fatigue Fixer. Today, we're delving into the world of sleep and unraveling the mysteries behind what keeps us tossing and turning at night. I'm your host, Dr. Sarah, and today we're joined by one of my favorite people to help us do a deep dive into one of the most common reasons women are tired: bad sleep. Now, I know you've already heard the common advice, don't look at your phone before bed, it disrupts your sleep, and you should probably go ahead and do that. But today, we're moving beyond that. We're exploring a more profound and often overlooked aspect of sleep disturbances. Yes, today we're talking about the challenge many women face in giving themselves permission to truly rest. In a world that often glorifies busyness and multitasking, it's no surprise that switching off and allowing ourselves to rest can feel like an impossible task. But why is this particularly challenging for women? And more importantly, how is this struggle impacting our sleep? But that's not all. Have you ever found yourself wide awake at 3 a.m., your mind racing with thoughts you thought you dealt with during the day? We're going to explore the fascinating idea of how our bodies try to get our attention in the quiet of the night, bringing to the surface all the stress we've subconsciously swept under the rug. This is the one where you're wide awake at 3 a.m., and my guest today is Dr. Leigha Saunders. Turning her postpartum sleep deprivation into an opportunity to serve the millions of women who suffer in sleeplessness. Dr. Leigha Saunders is a naturopathic doctor and mom of two who deeply understands the struggle of insomnia. Dr. Leigha is an innovative leader and engaging speaker, passionately educating women as well as clinicians on the intersection of sleep and hormone health. Her passion for helping women get a good night's sleep fuels her private practice that helps women gain energy, balance their mood, regulate hormones, and sleep deep. Dr. Leigha is the creator of the Better Sleep Bootcamp, the 5-step framework for women who want better sleep through hormone balance. Ultimately, Leigha leads women in stepping into their truest and most beautiful, authentic selves during the day so they can sleep deep at night. With sleep scores that make us all jealous, that is true. I've seen them. They're incredible. Leigha's ultimate mission is to help women chase their dreams, not exhaustion. Leigha, my dear friend, welcome to the Fatigue Fixer podcast.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you. I could cry listening to you say all of those beautiful things. And I don't know whether to cry, either like tears of joy and gratitude and excitement and passion and all the things. So thank you for having me so that we can have this important conversation together.
Yeah, and have it in front of a microphone because this is something you and I talk about a lot in our offline life as friends and colleagues. And every time we get together, I learn something new about sleep, or I think about a different way to think about our sleep. And I love the conversations that we have around women and fatigue and why sleep is often such like a simple insight into some of the deeper stuff that's often going on. So that's, I think, where you and I are going to hang out today. And I would love if you would share your story of kind of what brought you into the sleep world, because I think so many women will resonate. And I think it also just explores some of these topics that we're going to dive into today.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So like many women, I love sleep. Number one.
Me too.
I was a great sleeper. And one year my sister even got me like an excited for bed Christmas themed package of presents, because it was just my thing. It was like I at the end of the day was always excited to go and recharge. And to me, one of the best feelings in the world is like getting into your cozy bed and being excited to fall asleep. And if you're not there yet, you're in the right place. We're going to unpack how you can be there at the end of the day. And so I had my first son, and like many women who have babies, experience that profound sleep loss and disruption in the immediate and extended postpartum phase. And of course, I knew that that was to be expected, and I was anticipating it. And throughout my pregnancy, you know, people and other moms said, oh, like, enjoy your sleep now, get it while you can. It's not going to happen while baby's here. And I knew that that was going to happen, but obviously not until you're in the thick of an experience like that do you really understand and appreciate how you feel. So in the depths of my postpartum sleep deprivation, at one point, I think it was around the 3 to 4 month mark. So I was back to work. I was managing a clinic. I was managing my own practice. I was trying to pump breast milk between patient visits. I was adjusting to life as a new mom. I still wanted to be a wife and a partner with my husband. I still wanted to have time for me. And I couldn't remember the last time I had slept for more than an hour and a half because my sleep was so broken. And at one point, a colleague asked me if I was okay. And usually we're on autopilot, right? Like, oh, hey, how are you? I'm good. How are you? I'm good. But in that moment, I was like, I'm not okay. And I had zero tolerance for putting on a facade. Mm-hmm. So I was just honest. And I was like, you know what? I'm not okay, actually. And she's like, yeah, you don't really seem like yourself. And I was like, yeah, I can't remember the last time I actually felt rested and that I could like show up as fully functional. And I was stuck in this pattern of having broken sleep over the course of the night because of my son, who would wake up. And then even once he was back to sleep or started sleeping longer stretches, I still woke up or would struggle to fall back to sleep. I would wake up in the morning feeling exhausted and anxious. I would go through my day completely depleted and tired and brain fogged, not having the energy to do anything extra. Like I remember waking up and feeling, okay, what is the bare minimum I need to do to get through today? And holding on or like grasping for hope that tonight would be different. Like tonight's going to be the night. Mm-hmm. And then I would have a lot of anticipatory anxiety in the evening. Even thinking about bed or going to bed would create more anxiety because I didn't know how it was going to go. Or I started to build an association with it being a negative, frustrating, stress-inducing experience. So that created a whole turmoil of sleeplessness overnight and exhaustion during the day, which those of you who are listening can probably deeply appreciate. And then it was my own naturopathic doctor who had said to me, like, how are you sleeping? When I asked her, when am I going to feel like myself again? Like, how do I get back on the road here? And that was a pivotal moment for me because I was suffering through it all on my own. And on that morning where my other colleague asked me, like, how are you doing? You don't seem like yourself. And I responded like, I'm not okay because of all those reasons. She was like, well, other women do it. Mm-hmm. And I know that her response was well-intended. And if you've listened to me speak and share my story before, you've probably heard that story as well. But I took it as like, okay, other women figured it out, so I can too. I'm sure it'll get better, or I'm sure this is just what happens now. I'm sure I'll just get used to it. And over time, and once I got to that place where I was ready to seek help and start examining what I could do to control and improve my sleep, I realized that that narrative is so pervasive. Other women do it. It's never a good enough reason.
No. And the answer is not like, suck it up and just, like keep doing it. And that's why I think that story for me is like so emblematic of a big part of this problem, which is how much we normalize lack of sleep, how much we normalize fatigue. And that's the whole reason for this entire podcast, is that it is not normal for 50% of our population to have their status quo being, I am tired all the time. I refuse to accept that. And I know if you're listening here, you probably refuse to accept that. And sleep is such a big part of that. And again, I think it's like this idea that, well, now you're a mom or now you're going through perimenopause and menopause, like, sorry, but sleep's going to suck. And that's just what you have to deal with, when we know it has massive repercussions. It's not just that we're tired. It has massive repercussions. And one of the things that you say that I think is so true is that if you're not sleeping, you're not healing. And so sleep is impacting literally every piece of our health. And that's why I wanted to have you here, because it is just such one of those fundamental pieces that we need to have in place if we're going to have good energy, but also heal, manage our weight, manage all the pieces that so many of us want when it comes to our health.
Absolutely. And that narrative is so pervasive. We don't even recognize it. We don't even know. So that idea of sleep being the ultimate foundation of health and being a crucial and critical part to every single person on this planet, like, there is no mistake that we are meant to spend about 30% of our lives asleep. That is not just a blip by Mother Nature and intelligent design. Like, we are meant to get deep quality sleep because it's how we heal and how we grow and how we recover. And that narrative of like, well, other people do it, or this is just what happens now is not just pervasive in women and motherhood and hormone changes, but it's also pervasive in medicine. And one of the key things I started to realize at the beginning of this journey for me as a doctor was that no one else was talking about this, or very few people were talking about this from this angle, right? Of course, we know and recognize things like sleep apnea or narcolepsy, right? We know insomnia is a thing, but no one was like standing on the mountaintops being like, if you're not sleeping, you're not healing. And so like, where are all the people? Why aren't we talking about this? Why? And I was going back and like, did I even learn anything about sleep in medical school? Like, we didn't, right?
I don't remember anything.
I don't remember anything. I'm like,
no.
Maybe I blocked it out. So then I was like, okay, we have some learning to do, because even as a naturopathic doctor who is someone and a practitioner is more likely to take into account these foundational pieces of health and counsel our patients, I was doing nothing. I was asking my patients maybe if they brought it up as a concern, and they would say things like, oh, I've always been a bad sleeper and that's just the way it is. Or I feel like I've tried everything. And I'd be like, okay, moving on, because I didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
And in this journey, I started reflecting and thinking about the patients in my practice. And I became fascinated when I had the realization like, the patients who are coming in, regardless of their concern or goal, who are established well sleepers, they respond to what we're doing. They get better. They stay better. The people who continuously come back in or struggle or who don't get the results that we would expect are terrible sleepers or believe that they are. And so when I remember some of the first hints that the universe was trying to share with me. One of them was a podcast episode, and that came across in my inbox about sleep. And I was like, screw you. Whoever it was, I was like, I don't want to hear about your ability to get good sleep. But then when I listened to it, it was also a pivotal moment, because I was like, holy shit, we have so much control that we aren't even acknowledging. Like, we aren't even scratching the surface of what we can do personally and professionally. So then I was like, okay, I need to fix my own sleep, because I knew that would be the key to me feeling 110,000% better. And when I did that for me and then started sharing tidbits even with my patients, like, now my practice has completely transformed and what I can offer patients to get better sleep. But even at the beginning stages, I started to see that they responded too, and they started feeling better. And my patients were like, okay, I feel like me again. I didn't know I could still sleep this well at this point in my life. It's been so long. Like, this changes everything. So then I went all in. I was like, this is it. Like, this is, and it's so interesting to me always how like our childhood patterns or what we play in make believe or what we say, right? Or our tendencies, like that love of sleep and a lot of like stories around that for me as a child. Like once I wanted to sleep in the tree in our backyard, like those things. It just comes through in your adult life. And if you're willing to see those gifts and open them and look at it and be like, I could talk about sleep all day and all night. So that's why I'm here.
I love it. And I'm so glad you're here. And for those of you who are like, how do we do it? What do we do? We're going to get into some of those specifics. But before we do that, I want to set the stage a little bit. Number one, in terms of like how common sleep issues are. So we know that only about 40% of the adult population in the US regularly gets the recommended 7 to 9 hours of sleep. And 20% of people are getting less than 6 hours. I know if I get less than 6 hours, I am a grumpy, exhausted version of myself. And it is no fun to be me. And it's probably no fun to be around me. So I can't imagine consistently getting less than 6 hours. We know that women are more likely to experience sleep issues and insomnia, and that's a big part of what we'll dive in today. And it's not just like a personal problem, it's also a massive economic problem. And one of the stats that I got from the training that you did was around people are spending this was in Canada, $339 million on alcohol as a sleep aid. Holy shit balls.
I know.
Yeah.
And so that's like a personal investment. And to look at the government costs and workplace employer costs of sleep deprivation, insomnia, sleep loss, it's billions of dollars on an annual basis. Like imagine, right? Just imagine what we could do. And when I say sleep deprivation, that might land as an extreme phrase for some people, but in the medical literature, getting less than 7 hours of sleep on a regular basis, which as you just identified, Sarah, is like 40% or probably more of the general population. Like that's the definition.
Yeah.
It's not surviving on 1 or 2 hours a night. It's getting less than 7 hours a night on a regular basis.
Yeah. So let's kind of define what insomnia is, because I think people, like you said, if they're not awake for most of the night, they assume they're fine. So I love this idea of like the rule of 30s. So if you take more than 30 minutes to fall asleep, or you're awake for more than 30 minutes in the middle of the night, or you wake up more than 30 minutes before your kind of desired wake up time. So if any of those three things are true, then technically you, by definition, meet the criteria for insomnia. Is that right?
Yep. If those things are happening at least 3 nights a week for about 3 months or more on a consistent basis. So it's the rule of threes. So basically at some point over the course of the night, you're struggling for 30 minutes or more, 3 nights or more per week, 3 months or more.
Okay. And can we start to break down, because some women have trouble falling asleep, some women have trouble staying asleep, and then and I started to experience this and it really sucks that if I wake up to pee or I wake up for any other reason kind of close to my wake up time, it's been so hard for me to get back to sleep, which really, really is painful. And I know I have so many patients who are struggling with this, and now I'm acutely feeling their pain. So can we let's talk about kind of the piece about falling asleep. What are some of the most common reasons or some of the pieces that you're seeing in terms of the like trouble falling asleep?
Yeah. You can't think about bed 5 minutes before it's time to go.
Yes.
That is the takeaway. So your ability to fall and stay asleep starts when you wake up in the morning and is then going to be influenced by everything you do or do not do during the day. So for people who have trouble falling asleep, generally the most common pattern I see in my practice is they're getting the timing wrong, because we can get into a cycle, and you might have experienced this if you're listening, where you struggled with either falling asleep or staying asleep. So then you sleep past your ideal or intended wake up time to try to get any bit of sleep that you can. And a lot of women in my practice will say, like, it feels like I'm finally getting that deep sleep at, like 5, 6 a.m. So then you push your wake up time later, you get up, your morning is super chaotic, you hit the ground running, And then you may not actually be awake and long enough over the course of that day in order to effectively build what we call sleep pressure. So the sensation of sleep pressure is that sensation in your eyes where they're heavy, your eyelids are heavy, maybe they feel like sandy or gritty. You just want to close your eyes. This happens when you're like in a car and falling asleep, hopefully in the passenger side, or when you're watching a movie and you're being like lulled to sleep on the couch, or you can hopefully connect with that sensation. And then typically like your head feels heavy and you just want to drop. And so that sensation of sleep pressure for most people builds to a maximal point 14 to 16 hours after you've woken up, provided you have not over-caffeinated and provided you have not napped. So let's say somebody wakes up at 6 a.m. Now their maximal sleep pressure window is going to fall somewhere between 8 and 10 p.m. A lot of people, let's say if you're that person who's like slept in an hour or two, then what is ideal for your wake up time, or if your wake up time is flip flopping across the week because you're just trying to get whatever sleep you want when you can, then your bedtime may not be in line with that 14 to 16 hour window. And for people who have chronic insomnia, we tend to need to push that window to that 16-hour mark. Again, your body is going to be unique, so you need to pay attention to that feeling. But when we stay awake longer than 16 hours, we run the risk of overstimulating ourselves. So for some people, to recap that wake up time, like they might be going to bed too early. So if you're not tired, like if you're not feeling that sleep pressure, don't go and get into bed because it's a certain time. I always tell my patients, I would rather you stay up a little bit late, but have some buffer time is what I call it. Have some time where you intentionally decompress, you unplug, you do something that helps you unwind and feel fulfilled at the end of your day. Then when you connect with that sensation of heaviness in your eyes and head, then go and try and fall asleep. If you push past 16 hours of being awake, we tend to move into that second wind. So if you've ever been tired but wired and you're like physically exhausted, but your mind is racing, typically that's because once we're awake for 16 hours, cortisol gets released. And that's because we think evolutionarily there's like a protective or compensatory mechanism there to help keep us awake. There is no other species on this planet that purposely delays their bedtime or sleep deprives themselves other than animals who are searching for food in times of famine. So if a squirrel can't find enough nuts, we're recording this in the fall, it will stay up and push that bedtime a little bit later to gather and store more food. It requires cortisol to do that, to help them stay awake and alert, to have the energy to do that. So if we're not careful, we can find ourselves in that same state, but there's no acute stressor necessarily. I mean, we might have a high degree of perceived stress in the moment, but it's not that I would hope or expect that we're like immediately facing famine or that there's like a lion, tiger, or bear in our bedroom, right? We're choosing to stay up later.
Yeah. So, and I think that's something that I really try to articulate. And if you're listening, like, you don't just go to bed when you're tired. You want to wait until you feel sleepy. And that is a different thing. And like you said, I think cortisol is like such a buzzword right now. And people are like obsessed with all the things that affect their cortisol. They're often like taking coffee out and they're worried about high intensity exercise. But yet, like, how many of us stay up past our bedtime and think like no big deal? If you want to do something to help balance your cortisol, getting enough and getting good quality sleep is probably one of the most powerful things you can do for your cortisol. Much more powerful than whether or not you drink coffee, much more powerful probably than the type of exercise you're doing. So, getting to bed. And that brings us to one of the kind of better sleep rules that I really learned from you, which is do not go to bed until you're actually sleepy. Because like you said, if you're not actually ready for bed, you're going to linger there. And then that can create all kinds of like negative associations where now you start to anticipate, well, I'm going to go to bed, but I'm not going to fall asleep. Can we talk about the revenge bedtime procrastination? Because I think this is another thing, not necessarily that women are having trouble falling asleep, but we're delaying bedtime because we feel like that is the only alone me time that we have. So I'd love kind of your perspective for someone who's listening and who's like, but that's the only time I have. And it's like really important. Like, what do you recommend when that's what women feel like it's my only time to be alone?
Such a great question. One of the most surprising things I learned, and a new piece of information. So when I was putting together the content for Mastering Sleep Medicine, which was a 10 to 12 hour continuing education course that I delivered to clinicians live, you were there, Sarah.
Yes,
so you took
so
all the
good.
magic away. One of the parts when we talked about revenge bedtime procrastination was the strongest predictive factor for who is going to procrastinate their bedtime, which means you should go to bed by a certain time, or you wake up in the morning like, gosh, tonight I'm going to go to bed early, but you don't. So you're just pissed off that it's your bedtime and you do something else instead. You revenge against that bedtime. The strongest predictive factor is being female. Fascinating. And I was like, I have my theory, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the women are doing all the things and they're staying up past their bedtime. And so that's the one of the key things I think to take into consideration with this is what you just said. Like if the only time you feel that you either have time for you or you're excited about how you're spending your time is at the bookends, like either when you first wake up before you have to jump into your day, so say before your kids wake up or your partner's awake or you're starting work or whatever, or at the end of the day when all of that has also quieted down and now you have time for you, that is a massive problem, in my opinion. And I know for a lot of people, it might sound like a luxury to go through your days excited and be wholeheartedly committed to all of your intentions and be like so looking forward to, like I looked at my calendar today and I was like, I am excited it's Monday. I'm excited to show up and do the things that are on my calendar and meet with Sarah and go for an acupuncture appointment later. And like, I'm not saying I love everything I do in every day, but I didn't wake up and look at my calendar and be like, it's Monday. Here we go again. There is no judgment in that if that's what you're experiencing. The first thing to do is acknowledge it. Because if you are not feeling aligned, if you're not excited about how you're spending your time, if you don't feel like your time is for you in some capacity, if you don't feel like you're living up to your fullest potential or capacity or like using your talents and your gifts during the day, if you are overscheduled, if you are overwhelmed, if you are under supported during the day, there's no way in hell you're going to get deep sleep at night.
And I love that you bring this piece into it because I think this is where the magic actually happens. And I know you've seen this and I've seen this, that when women start to live in alignment, and this is something I talk so much about with my Effortless Energy members, that the amount of energy that we waste living out of alignment, it's such an energy suck. And part of what you and I have talked about so much is like when you're up at 3 a.m, or even if you're going to bed and your mind has not, like it cannot shut down, it's not a flaw. It's not something wrong. It's how your body is trying to communicate with you, because chances are your body's been trying to get your attention all day, but because you were too busy with work and kids and all the things that we're all very busy with, you didn't have the time or the desire to notice or pay attention to any of those signals. And you better believe that when you put your head down on the pillow and it's finally quiet, your body's going to tell you what it needs to tell you. And it might seem like a huge inconvenience, but it's actually this like amazing quality that our bodies have, that they're always trying to guide us towards healing and alignment. And if we can start to look at it that way, I think it creates this whole other way of us to start to look at sleep beyond like, oh, I guess I'll try some melatonin. No, you need to look, like you said, what you do the second you wake up until you go back to bed, all of that is influencing your ability to get good sleep.
We could end the recording there.
Yeah. The end. You're welcome.
But let's not. Let's not, because there's so much to unpack there, and it's so true. Like taking the melatonin or the ashwagandha or the sleep complex
whatever
supplement,
the
whatever
latest thing is. Yeah.
That's the easy thing.
Yeah.
Sure, I wish. And I promise you, I show up here in full transparency and confidence that if there were a magic supplement that would fix everyone's sleep problems, I would be manufacturing it and I would be making millions. But a sleep supplement isn't going to fix the fact that you are unhappy in your most intimate relationship. It's not going to fix the fact that you don't feel respected or valued at your job. It's not going to fix the fact that you are not like you said, living in alignment, right? And that's going to mean something different to everybody. And it also doesn't mean that you have to overhaul your life. It doesn't mean that you have to get a divorce or quit your job or move to a new country, but it could be something like you've been having the nudge from your body that it wants and needs to move more. Like whatever that looks like for you, you get the inkling of like, oh yeah, I used to do that workout regularly, or I used to go to that yoga class, or like, I feel like doing that again, or whatever. But then your ego steps in and that inner critic gets louder and gives you all the reasons why you don't have time for that. And one of my favorite quotes, who I don't know who it originated from, but is that we so often confuse our desire to materialize a goal with the need to make a decision. So if you want better sleep, it's a decision.
Yeah.
And it's not something that magically is going to change tonight, but the decision starts with, if I were a better sleeper, if I slept deep at night because I ended my day with such deep satisfaction and fulfillment and happiness and gratitude for all of the things. I'm not saying that means everything in your life has to be perfect. There's still going to be conflict and challenge and growth opportunity. But if you looked at your day in that, like you said, your mind and your body and your soul can rest. But instead, what do? We think that we have to perform or behave or be productive in a certain way and a certain level, and not just as well as we did yesterday, but actually today it has to be even better, right? More. And the number of times I've seen this play out is just too many to deny, right? So in women or in my practice who I can give you so many examples. Like one woman who loved her job, but still, like her insomnia was actually one of the most treatment refractory ones. The night she retired, she was like, I just started sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
I just started sleeping. And then we unpacked it how, like, again, yeah, her job was, she enjoyed it, but it was still obviously had a massive stress on her body, right? And with other patients who, let's say, are stuck in a toxic relationship or have a complex health and have that inkling or nudge, a desire for more space or separation from what the circumstance that they're currently in. And I know, and I can appreciate how hard those decisions are to make to create that change, but there's so much resistance. And that goes back to the narrative we were talking about at the beginning, right? If the narrative we have or the expectation or belief we have is like, this is just how it is. As a woman, I don't deserve deep sleep, or I'm not going to get it because my work demands this, my family life demands that. Then we're never going to give ourselves the opportunity to even explore that. So a recent patient encounter and I can think of is like, I said, what would it be like if you feel in your body? Like, what if you had more space? And she said it would feel like a weight was off my chest, off my shoulders, off my body. Like it feels light and expansive. And I said, okay, so like what comes up after that? And she's like, well, I don't know if I could do it. I don't know if I could create that space because of my complex health and my longstanding insomnia. And I flipped it and I said, what if creating that space got rid of or significantly alleviated the complex health issues and the longstanding insomnia? And it took her a moment, but I could just see this like,
wait a minute.
Yeah. Like we don't even give ourselves permission to even think that it could be a possibility.
Yeah. And I just keep thinking to like, I know we're both moms and maybe if you're listening, maybe you're a mom too. Like We would never purposely sleep deprive our children. Ever, ever, ever. You would probably, if you're a pet owner, you would never purposely sleep deprive your pet. And yet we have this story in our heads, and part of it is the culture that we live in for sure, that we somehow are not worthy or are less deserving, or that sleep is what we get to do once we've checked off all the other things that are apparently more important. Like, I don't know about you, but laundry is not more important to me than sleep. Dishes, not more important. Dust bunnies, not more important. And it goes back to what you said. That is a decision, which is I have decided that sleep is very high on my list of priorities, which even means for now, like if someone invites me somewhere and it's a late start, I think very seriously about whether I want to stay up late. And that might seem ridiculous, but that's what I know works best for me. And so, yes, like I went to a concert the other week and I went to bed later and I was a bit extra tired. So I made that conscious decision. But I think when we haven't decided that sleep is a priority, that's why it's so easy to say yes to everything. And then we're like, well, my day was full again. Like, what the heck? Because you haven't actually decided that this is something that you are going to prioritize for yourself.
100%. Yeah. And again, no judgment in that.
Right.
We all have to choose. And there might be some points in your life at which sleep has to take a backseat for very real reasons. But it still comes back to this idea of like, there's probably more choice and control that you have than you have explored to the present moment. And so this is an invitation to check in with yourself and an opportunity to think about, how do you feel about your day, not your night? Because we can fixate, and patients with insomnia can fixate and become so obsessive over their sleep at night and all the things that they do to support their sleep, and routines can become very rigid.
Yeah.
That's not going to get us further in the long term. And I love this journey and how it's played out for me. And yeah, at the beginning, focusing so much on the pre-sleep routines, which are important, we can talk about as well, and sleep itself and what to do if you wake up in the night and whatnot. But more and more I fall in love with this idea of like, let's talk about your day. Let's talk about how you feel in your day, how you're showing up, what's on your schedule, and really move that into working for you. Because I also like to say it would be a different conversation, right? If a patient was sitting across from me and was saying, you know what, I work out 3 times a week. I have great work-life boundaries. I make time for my lunch in the day. I'm not being pinged by work. I get outside every day for some fresh air. I don't rely on coffee for my energy. At the end of the day, I, reflect on my day. I feel good. If there's like still a piece of contention, I have some tools and resources that I can use to unpack that. I connect with people who are important to me, my loved ones, my friends, my partner, and then I go to bed. Like, it would be a different conversation if that person couldn't sleep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would add, like, not going to bed beside someone you like actively are super resentful towards or like might not like very much. Like, even just energetically, I was thinking about that. I'm like, think of what that's like to lie beside someone you don't like at all right now. Like, that's a big stress. So we've talked about a big piece of why women are struggling to fall asleep. And I think a lot of this also would show up in kind of why we wake up. What are some of the reasons that you're seeing why women might fall asleep, no problem, but they're the ones waking up or having like tossing and turning in the night? What's going on there?
So you're probably falling asleep at a pure exhaustion for all the reasons we've talked about, which is all good. And then typically we're waking up in the night for a couple of reasons. So if we take the obvious, like we want to look at your external environment, is your bed partner, and that could be person, like
child.
Yeah, child. That could be dog. Yeah, pet. Like, is there something in your environment that's disruptive to you? And do you need to take a hard look at that and make a decision to start there and say, you know what, like I need a sleep divorce so we don't get divorced in real life.
I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to ask about the sleep divorce.
Yeah. And there's so much stigma around like sleeping separately than your partner, right? But you can still have intimacy and connection. But for a lot of people, I work with lots of patients who sleep separately and that works very well for them. So if not, let's say like you really feel like you've got a sleep sanctuary, it's cool, it's dark, it's quiet, you love your partner, there's no dog taking over half the bed or like a baby. Like last night I was like on the edge, my 18-month-old is like taking over. It's hilarious. Funny, not funny, but it happens. So from there, then we want to look at a couple of things, and that's like, what are you doing in the 1 to 2 hours before bed? Because again, you might fall asleep out of pure exhaustion, but pre-sleep cognition, meaning the thoughts that you're thinking about right before and leading up to bedtime directly correlate with your ability to get good quality and quantity sleep. So that means if you're ruminating over your day, if you're not happy, if there's something that's stressing you out that you haven't given yourself permission and time and space to sit with and explore and decompress, then it's probably going to show up, like you were saying, at 3 a.m. when you wake up for another reason, like to go pee or to roll over because you're uncomfortable. So then any wake up, which is a lot longer than 5 minutes in the night, is associated with a surge in cortisol. And when we have that little surge in cortisol, for the people who are running around all day, like super high on cortisol all the time, then that little drop extra overnight is like the drop that overflows the bucket. So then one of cortisol's job is to stimulate your mind to scan your environment for potential threats. So what happens at 3 a.m. with that little bit of extra cortisol that was just dropped into your system is you start thinking about and worrying about and ruminating and replaying conversations, your to-do list, like all the things. You might have woken up for another reason, but again, if you aren't addressing those things in the day, then that will come through. So that's a really important part to think about, and we can chat about some tools to use in that pre-bedtime to unpack that. The other reason you might be thinking, like, I'm not stressed, I love my life, like, I still don't sleep well, and I exercise. Like we said, cortisol is not the enemy. We also want to leverage it, meaning like it does give us good energy in the day. It does help us perform. It does have anti-inflammatory capabilities and important roles to play in our body. But overnight, we are fasting. You're not eating, hopefully, during your sleep. And so if we aren't balancing our blood sugar during the day, what's really fascinating, again, I unpacked this in the Mastering Sleep Medicine intensive course for clinicians. I wanted to get down to like understanding the ins and outs of everything. And so there's this trend right now around using CGMs or continuous glucose monitors for looking at your blood sugar overnight. So in people who are diabetic, type 1 in particular, if they go into hypoglycemia, so their blood sugar drops, and to some extent for those with type 2 diabetes too, their blood sugar drops below a certain threshold, which is going to be unique to each individual, but that will actually push them into a deeper sleep, which has potentially dangerous like repercussions, right? Because a type 1 diabetic who goes into a deeper sleep may then actually go and move into a diabetic coma. And there have been unfortunate cases of deaths from those pieces happening, which is why insulin pumps that maintain that 24-hour level of insulin are so incredible. But for normal, like metabolically healthy people who go hypoglycemic overnight, so our blood sugar drops, again, that's going to be a point at which is unique to you, then that creates a compensatory mechanism where cortisol is released in order for your blood sugar to come back up, because that's one of the other jobs of cortisol. So it's not necessarily that you're stressed, with air quotes, but that you're not fueling your body appropriately, meaning like maybe you're under consuming calories, maybe you're not getting adequate protein or healthy fats or carbohydrates and fiber. And so then your blood sugar drops overnight and you wake up because you're hungry, which you may not actually feel hungry. And
your brain's hungry. Your brain needs glucose.
Yes. Yeah. And the fascinating pieces of like putting the puzzle together is we have hormones that regulate our appetite control, like leptin and ghrelin, and they also follow a 24-hour clock. And so when we are asleep, our hunger is suppressed, right? We're fasting, but we don't get hungry or we don't feel hungry because of the interplay of those hormones. So what I think is happening, because I ask a lot of patients, like, do you ever wake up hungry? And they're like, no. I mean, sometimes I do, or if I'm like happen to be awake long enough, then I'm like, oh, now I'm getting hungry. Mm-hmm. But you might wake up for one of these other reasons and not feel hungry because leptin is like appropriate at the appropriate level, suppressing your appetite and hunger drive, but you might be hypoglycemic, right? And so then it's also not about, again, and if you feel like all the other boxes are ticked, but you aren't confident in your nutrition, that might be a great place to start. Because you could be waking up and staying away from that low blood sugar.
This is a conversation I have all the time because I think when we think about stress, we think about all these external things, right? We think about work and family and being busy. And I always try to remind women that your nutrition can be a massive source of stress, both in terms of like your relationship with food. But if you are, like you said, under fueling, your body never knows if lunch is coming or what time it's coming. If you're following a long kind of like intermittent fasting regimen, all of those things could put you at higher risk for blood sugar issues overnight because if, like you said, if your blood sugar is not well managed during the day, it probably isn't magically well managed at night. And these irregular meal patterns are, like you said, it's like another source of stress that kind of adds to this already like full bucket of other stresses that we have. So I think it's such an important message that, again, going back to like what you do during the day has a massive influence on your sleep, and meal timing would be a huge part of that.
And to not overcomplicate it.
Right.
Like, don't go for anything more complex than understanding what your total caloric requirement is and what that looks like from a macronutrient perspective, meaning like what percentage of those calories should be coming from protein, fat, and carbohydrates to help you feel full and satisfied, balance your blood sugar, support your mood, support your energy, support your sleep. It doesn't mean you have to be on a diet. But what I see, Sarah, and I'm sure you do too in your practice, is like women come in wanting a complicated plan. And I'm like, okay, how much protein are you getting in a day? They're like, oh, excuse me, what?
Yeah. Or they want a supplement. And I'm like, have you heard of breakfast? Right? Remember that meal we used to call breakfast that was more than a cup of coffee? What, can we try that? Like, yes. It is. And even before I talk about macros, I'm like, can we come up with regular meal times?
Yeah.
If you are not doing regular meal times, before you even look at what you're eating, I would start with just start having 3 meals a day at regular times, and that will be a massive stress off your system. And then we can get more granular about what you're eating. But even just the timing, like, it's ridiculous that that's a conversation we need to have. But because fasting has become this like panacea for so many women who are seeking better health, that they're sometimes actually causing problems with their fasting and their meal pattern, like their timing.
Yeah, I love that idea.
Yeah. Okay. I want to talk about, since we're talking about food and kind of fasting and different things, I want to talk about some of the myths that I hear that I want to make sure that we break down. One is the people who are like, I can drink a cup of coffee and go to sleep, no problem. And to that we say, that is not accurate. You might fall asleep, no problem, but there's no way you're getting the level of sleep you would if that caffeine wasn't in your system. So one of the things, and I wrote this down from your training, is that it takes 16 to 23 hours to metabolize 90% of your caffeine. So your 4 p.m. coffee, a lot of it is still floating through your bloodstream at 3 a.m. at night. So what are your kind of like guidelines around coffee?
Yeah, you nailed it. So you might fall asleep and sleep even appearingly fine. But if we were to put you in a sleep lab or be able to look at your brain waves and sleep architecture over the course of the night, they would be different under the influence of caffeine versus under the influence of no caffeine. And that also goes for different medications and alcohol and cannabis and things like that. But for the purposes of caffeine, it takes the average person about 12 hours to metabolize most of what would be required to have an effect on your sleep. Okay. So where I work with patients is to reverse engineer this piece of asking them, what is your ideal wake up time? Like, imagine that. You get to choose. You get to decide. So what is the time at which you would like to wake up that would give you time for yourself in the morning? It would give you time to do what you want to do before you hit the ground running. It doesn't mean you wake up earlier and start work earlier, unless that allows you to end your day earlier. But like, what is your ideal wake up time? And so then from there, we generally work and we'll say like, okay, let's say it's 6 a.m. Then 14 to 16 hours later is going to land us somewhere between 8 and 10. For most people, their bedtime is going to be desired around 10 p.m. 8 p.m. is going to seem a bit early, although I was in bed before 9 and had no shame about that last night.
So good.
So let's say that your ideal bedtime based on these rules and hours we're talking about is about 10 p.m. So then I reverse engineer and will say to my patients, okay, why don't we then keep your caffeine intake to before 10 a.m., 12 hours before your ideal bedtime. I love coffee. It's part of what gets me out of bed in the morning. I do not take it away from my patients unless it's having a really negative effect on them. But even in that case, we tend to like reduce it. And there are rare cases, unless patients come to me and say like, I'm sensitive to caffeine or I don't like coffee, I'm not going to put it back in. But it's one of those things that you don't have to go without to get good sleep. It's just the timing, like your meal pattern, that matters.
Yeah. And can we talk about alcohol? Because also this idea that like I'm having a glass of wine to unwind and it helps me fall asleep. What happens when we have alcohol?
So such an important conversation. Mm-hmm. So alcohol at the initial aspect of intake can have that sedative effect. It is a depressant, so it will help us relax and help us feel tired or sleepy or maybe fall asleep more easily. But the net effect is negative. So over the course of the night after consuming alcohol, and this is really if you are consuming it within 4 to 6 hours of your bedtime. So if you choose to consume, then the recommendation is to keep your last drink to at least 4 to 6 hours before. Keeping in mind that in Canada, anything more than 2 drinks per week is against the recommendations for what is considered safe. And really no amount of alcohol is actually safe or like beneficial to our health. That could be a whole other conversation.
Yes.
But when we consume alcohol in excess, when we consume too much for our tolerance, when we consume it too close to bedtime, yes, we may fall asleep, but we will be more likely to have fragmented sleep that may appear obvious to you in terms of like you're waking up, or it might be as it relates to what we call micro wake up. So you're not necessarily awake or aware that you're awake or awake for long enough. You just kind of like toss and turn. It inhibits REM, which is the stage of sleep that we get into in that second half of the night. So typically from about 1 or 2 a.m. onwards. So I certainly notice that after a glass of wine or 2 in the evening, like my sleep from that point on is really broken. And basically as we move through our sleep cycles, we go through different stages. But once we get into REM under the influence of alcohol, we just wake up. And then we miss that important stage. And REM is when we dream. And REM is when we process a lot of emotions. So we miss out on a lot of benefits of our sleep. And then as a side tangent, because I know this is maybe one of your questions too, where patients will say like, I dream a lot. Is that a problem? Or like my sleep is so dream disturbed. Dreams are meant to happen. We are meant to spend a certain amount of time in REM, and REM is our most deeply connected sleep stage to circadian rhythm, meaning if you stay up late until that 2 or 3 a.m. When you first fall asleep, you're going to miss out on all the deep sleep you would typically get from before midnight to that midpoint in your sleep. You're going to go right into REM. And then that's when you'll dream more. But REM is a lighter stage of sleep. It's not a deep stage. And if we have been selectively deprived of REM, so let's say we're on a medication, let's say we are consuming alcohol on a regular basis, and then we take those things out, and this applies to any sleep stage. So if we're selectively deprived of any sleep stage, our brain and body will then preferentially binge on that sleep stage at its next opportunity. And it takes, do you remember those stats from the course? Like this was on sleep deprivation as a whole, but it was like, you're getting less than 5 hours. It was like 4 to 5 hours on a regular basis. Then you need at least 3 consecutive 8-hour sleep opportunities or 2 consecutive 10-hour sleep opportunities. Like who's getting that?
Yeah.
No one.
No.
So we get so used to the influence, so used to the experience of sleep deprivation. So when we're under the influence of alcohol, we're not getting into REM. We're waking up more frequently. It's going to raise our core body temperature, which makes it hard for us to get into a deep sleep because a drop in your core body temperature is required for that. And it's a diuretic, so you're more likely to wake up because you're having a hot flash and you got to go pee.
Yeah.
So have your wine when it's a conscious choice to enjoy it and perhaps maybe celebrate it. But if it's your go-to tool for decompressing at the end of the day, I would invite you to explore that further and perhaps find something that's more constructive.
Yeah. I feel like we could talk for another 2 hours, and we'll have you back
We'll
because
do a
there's so
sleep
much
series.
more.
I
We'll do
know.
a sleep series. I want to leave our listeners with some of the kind of better sleep basic rules that I really took away from the training that I did with you. So number one, which was the most important rule, is that you have to get up at a consistent time. And Leigha talked about why this is so important. When you sleep in or you wake up later, you're messing up your ability to fall asleep that night, and you create this like vicious cycle. So even if you haven't really had enough sleep or you're not like ready, you got to pick a time and just force yourself to get up. Number two, don't go to bed until you're sleepy. So not just tired, but really sleepy. Number three, if you're in bed and you can't sleep, we didn't talk about this, but don't stay in bed and linger and start to stress out. Leave your bed or your bedroom. Do something kind of quiet, and then only go back when you are feeling sleepy again. And I think you always give the analogy of a train. Like, can you...
analogy is the dining table. So Matthew Walker, who wrote Why We Sleep, likes to say you would never sit at your dining room table waiting to get hungry. So don't get into bed waiting to get sleepy. And like you said earlier, Sarah, like if you're lying in bed awake, trying and desiring to be asleep, then that is so incredibly frustrating. It just generates anxiety and frustration and more cortisol, and it just wakes us up even more. So the recommendation is to move to a space and do something like read a book or listen to an audiobook. Don't scroll TikTok. Mm-hmm. Don't clean your house. Don't unload your dishwasher. Like keep yourself quiet and ready for sleep so that ideally when you feel that sleep pressure build, you can just go back and get into your bed. If you sleep alone or if your partner isn't too disrupted by light, even turning on a low lamp and like reading something might be helpful. And at night, like it's really not the best time to deconstruct your thoughts, but perhaps that's something that comes up. I had someone say to me like, oh, I had that wake up and I just like journaled. And then when I got everything out on paper, I realized like, oh, this isn't that bad. So maybe that's because things are coming through in a bottleneck effect. That's helpful. But ideally, we can move that to another part in your day so you sleep through.
Perfect. And then next would be keeping your bed for sleep and sex only. Like don't do work in there. Don't have snacks. Don't hang out in your bed. It's for sleeping only. And then no naps because especially if they're kind of later in the day, they can really reduce that sleep pressure that Dr. Leigha talked about. And then you're making it harder for yourself to fall asleep that night.
When in doubt, just think about kids. They make sleep so obvious. If they nap too long, too late, or skip their nap,
they're a disaster.
Yeah. And it affects their bedtime.
Yeah. And so are we. We just have more. Number one, we've learned to hide our emotions better. So we don't usually throw a tantrum. And we've got more uppers and downers to help us get through the day than kids do. So we need sleep just as much as they do, if not more, because we also have to be there for them. Dr. Leigha, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with our listeners. Any kind of like parting words that you want to leave us with today?
This has just been such a beautiful conversation. And I think as someone who starts to explore this further, if you're thinking about making the decision or like now is the time I'm finally ready to do this, all of the things that you are going to do in changing your routines and creating new ones and taking supplements and changing your dietary habits and all of those pieces, they have to be from a place of knowing and believing that you are worth it and that you deserve the outcome and the result that you desire. Because when we aren't anchored in that, then we will spin our wheels and we will try things over and over again or jump from thing to thing. So really get clear on like, what is it that you desire? What is it that you want? What does your ideal day look like? I'm giving you permission to daydream. And how might that spill out over into your night? And start there. And if you need some constructive tools and guidance along the way, come hang out with me in the Better Sleep Bootcamp. I've done all the research and all the work and all the trial and error and put it together in a 5-step framework that women can move through. We're going to link that up with a $100 off coupon code in the show notes, or reach out to me on Instagram. That's where I am and I hang out, and we can connect and go from there.
Yeah, Dr. Leigha is my go-to sleep expert, whether it's my own sleep stuff or patient stuff. So definitely check her out and let her be your sleep expert as well. Dr. Leigha, thank you again for being here. And to our listeners, let's make the decision to get better sleep so we can fix our fatigue. And again, if you've heard something today, like what is the first step that you can take? Because you might feel like there's a lot of things that might need to change, but what is one step that you can take in the right direction that will allow you to live more in alignment, to reduce kind of the overwhelm of your day, and to allow you to step into the mindset of feeling, like Leigha said, just so worthy of deep sleep, because you are worthy of sleep and rest and good energy. We will see you back here in a couple weeks. Bye, everybody.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for spending your precious time with me today. Remember, it takes a village or a podcast community to really make a dent in this fatigue epidemic. If today's episode resonated with you, do me a favor. Share it with a friend or two, and if you have a second, drop us that shiny 5-star review. It means so much to me. Are you eager to solve your own personal energy puzzle? Hop on over to fatiguefixer.ca/quiz and check out my fatigue fingerprint quiz. Let's pinpoint what's standing between you and feeling your best. A big thank you to Jen Hudson and Drew Gardner over at Story Studio Network for bringing these conversations to life. And hey, just so you know, I've got your back. Your fatigue, it's super real, and it's definitely not just all in your mind. I see you and I believe you. Every 2 weeks, we'll keep these heart-to-hearts going, learning together and cheering each other on. Because between you and me, accepting perpetual exhaustion as the norm, that's not going to fly around here. See you back here in 2 weeks. Bye!